We're still talking about, we're in Judges now, by the way. We're in the book of Judges, chapter 1. Just very quickly, I want to show you a couple of slides. We started here last week. I want to start here again. Just to see the contrast in what God would have had Israel do, and in the book of Judges, what we actually see Israel do. What Israel's call was before the Lord, what Yahweh expected from His nation. He called them His nation. You will be a kingdom of priests. You will be my nation. I'll elevate you above every other nation on earth, and I will be your God. It was a relationship God was looking for. And this is in the book of Judges. At this period of Jewish history, this should have been in full force, but it wasn't. But what was Israel to do if they were to please Yahweh? They were to demonstrate through their life in the Holy Land. He promised the Holy Land, the Promised Land, the land of Canaan to Abraham over 500 years early. Finally, He has brought them into the Promised Land. Israel is living in the land. And God has brought them into the land so that they can demonstrate through their lives how glorious it can be to live under the government of Yahweh. This theocracy, we called it, where God is the king and Israel are His subjects. Israel becomes the king's subjects. They live in the kingdom of God in the land of Canaan, and Yahweh is their king. I've shown you that from the book of Samuel, where when Israel told Samuel, we want a king, we want to be like all the other nations, where God said, Samuel, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me from being their king. So it's clear at the beginning of Judges that this is the government God set up, that He would be the king of Israel and they would be His subjects. What we'll see through the book here are four stages. Over and over we see these four stages in the book of Judges. We see Israel fall into idolatry. Instead of worshiping the one true God, instead of demonstrating how wonderful and bountiful life can be under the government of Yahweh, Israel will instead choose to walk away from worshiping only Yahweh, and they'll adopt the idols, the false god worship of the people in Canaan. And they do it over and over. So they fall into idolatry. What does God do in punishing them? He allows one of the Canaanite peoples, the Midianites, different peoples in Canaan, He allows those Canaanites to oppress Israel. Instead of Israel being free in the land, being in complete control of the land of Canaan, their idolatry leads them into oppression and affliction by Gentiles. It's exactly the opposite of what God wanted for them to be doing in the land. But that's what the book of Judges is, unfortunately. Israel cries out. Come on in, y'all. Israel cries out to Yahweh. When they become afflicted by Canaanite nations, by Gentiles, after so many years, Israel will understand that they are wrong, and they will cry out to Yahweh, understanding that they should have worshipped Him alone the whole time. Good morning. So they'll cry out to Yahweh, and what does Yahweh do in His compassion and His love for Israel? He will raise up a judge. That's why we have the book called the Book of Judges. Notice that this isn't the Book of Kings. In this 300-year period of the Judges, God is the king. And that's how God intended for Him to be the king. So He raises up a judge, someone who will deliver Israel from the affliction. It always involves military battles, so this judge will lead Israel into battle, and they'll beat off by Yahweh's help, or with Yahweh's help, through Yahweh's help. They will defeat the Canaanite oppressors, and they will again be in worship of the one true God, Yahweh. They will be demonstrating to the people watching that life under the government of Yahweh is wonderful. And then a few years go by, and what do? They go right. It's like so many passages in the Bible say, but you grew fat. Israel just gets fat and happy in the land. And they forget day by day the grace that it takes, the grace of God that it takes to get through this life. And they forget their dependence on God. And so they go across the street where the grass they think is greener, and they slip right back into idolatry. And what happens after that? God will oppress them again. He'll use one of these nations in the land. He'll bring them under oppression. He'll take Israel's freedoms away from them, which is very interesting. The book of Judges to me is like a case study for America 2022. You fall into idolatry, you walk away from God. What does God do? He brings people to afflict you, to oppress you, so He can get your attention so that you will turn back to God, cry out to Him for guidance, for forgiveness, and then He'll raise up a judge to save us. This is Israel. This isn't the church, but God uses patterns over and over in the Scripture. And so they would call on God and He would save them. So I could talk more about that, but I can't. Joshua 1, the outline. This is what we're seeing in the book of, Judges. That should say Judges. That's funny. That should say Judges. I'll fix it later. What we're looking at in the first chapter, and then into chapter 2 and the first 5 verses, this is what we're looking at, so you'll understand what we're going through. It's a political and military background. We're looking at the land. What has Yahweh done in the land of Canaan? What does Israel look like? How many of the territories have they taken over? What cities are they living in? What cities have they been kept out of? What does the political landscape appear to be at the beginning of this 300-year period? So that's what chapter 1 is about. It's showing us what the political and military landscape looked like in the land of Canaan. And that's why we're reading about Judah and Simeon going to fight these people. And then we'll read about Benjamin, and then we'll read about all these other places. He's just laying out the map and saying, look, this is what's happening here. It's like, have you ever seen one of these movies? It's a war movie. And they've got this huge chart, a huge map out on a chart table. And you've got all these generals around it, and it's got all these pins and tanks, and it shows just exactly what the battlefield looks like. That's what Judges chapter 1 is. It's showing us exactly what the land of Canaan looks like. It's showing us what Israel was worshipful and obedient to do, and also what they were disobedient to do, and it shows us along the way what Yahweh is doing. It's a beautiful piece of writing. So in chapter 1, that's what we see, the partial conquest of Canaan by Israel. That word partial is the disobedience of Israel. God told them, go into Canaan and kill everything that breathes. I've given them 400 years to turn to me, and they have not, and time is up. It's time for Israel to have the land. It's time for Israel only to be in the land. I want the land purified of all idolatry, of all false god worship, and that's what I'm sending you in to do, and I will lead the way. So that's what we're seeing here, that Israel went in to do this, but they only partially did it. The question we have to ask, is that God's fault? Is that a weakness of Yahweh to defeat the Canaanites in the land of Canaan? Or was that a problem in the Jewish soul? So 1 through 20, this is the section we're in right now. We see some success. Judah and Simeon in conquering the southern parts of Israel, Canaan. In verse 21, we'll see the failure of the Benjamites to displace the Jebusites. What should Benjamin have done to all the Jebusites? Kill them. That's what God told him to do. As harsh as it may sound, again, He'd given them 400 years of grace. The iniquity of the Amorite was complete. It was time for the Canaanites to go. And God sent Israel in there to do just that. Benjamin didn't do it. God wanted it done. Benjamin didn't do it. In verse 22 to 29, we'll see the partial success, again, of the house of Joseph in occupying central Canaan. Remember, look at the map, and this is God saying, okay, in the south, this is what's occurring. These are the cities we've taken. These are the cities that are still occupied by pagan idolaters. And then He moves up the map. Now we're looking at central Israel. This is what the map looks like. This is what Israel was up against when the book of the Judges began to be judges. It's just laying out a framework here, a landscape. In verses 30 to 33, the failure of the Israelite tribes in northern Canaan. So now he moves from southern Canaan to central Canaan, and now he's moved to the north on the map to show what's going on in the land. What is the political background of the land of Canaan when they go into idolatry? Here's the thing. Why did Israel go into idolatry? That's the question to be asked. God's showing the landscape, and He's allowing us to ask the question, who failed? Was this a failure and a weakness of Yahweh to not cleanse the land? Or was this a failure and weakness of Israel to not cleanse the land? Why did Israel go into idolatry? Why did they walk away from worshiping God, Yahweh, the only God, the one true God, and start worshiping little idols that represented false gods? Why did that happen? Was it God's fault? Was it what God wanted, or instead was it Israel's choice? You know the answer. The last couple of verses, verse 34 to 36, we'll see the confinement of the tribe of Dan to the hill country by the Amorites. Dan can't take their land. We'll talk more about this as we go through. So we're going to start in Judges chapter 1, verse 10. I'm going to move pretty quick this morning, so please. This section, I told you last time, we ended here. I just want to say it again. It's almost verbatim of what happens in Joshua, or what is written in Joshua chapter 15, verse 15 through 19. It's a retelling of a story. It's a retelling of an event that's already taken place. I think God retells this event to show us just who Othniel is. He introduces the first judge of Israel. And his name is Othniel. Look what it says in verse 10. So Judah. This isn't a man named Judah, by the way. This is the tribe of Judah. Remember, Jacob had 12 sons. Abraham's son Isaac. Isaac's son Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. And these names, Judah, Benjamin, Simeon, are the tribes that came out from those 12 men. Those 12 men have been dead for hundreds of years. 400 plus years. Probably closer to 500 years by this time. So these are the tribes. These are the clans, the families came out from them. So the tribe of Judah then went up against the Canaanites who lived in Hebron. That's what they were supposed to do. They were supposed to go into their territories that Joshua had given them and kill everybody else that wasn't killed in the conquest. They were to go in and purify, cleanse the land, purge it of not only the people that were idolaters, but of the idols, of their altars, everything. Israel was to destroy everything that had anything to do with not worshiping Yahweh. And unfortunately, that's where they fell. Judah went against Canaan and Hebron, the Canaanites in Hebron. The name of Hebron formerly was Kiriath Arba. And they struck Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. These are three giants. Then from there they went against the inhabitants of Debir. The name of Debir formerly was Kiriath Sefer. And this is what Caleb says. Remember, I think this event is in here just to show who Othniel is and to pay a particular attention to treatment of women, as we'll see in just a minute. Caleb said, the one who attacks Kiriath Sefer and captures it, I will even give him my daughter Aksa for a wife. This lady becomes a very interesting woman in this early story of the book of Judges. Aksa. So Caleb makes an offer to his military, to his army. I need someone to lead in battle against that city, and if someone will lead and go and destroy that city and kill everything there, I will reward you with my beautiful daughter. That's what's going on. And a man steps forward. It's Caleb's nephew, Othniel, the son of Kenaz, who was Caleb's younger brother, captured it. So he took Caleb up on the deal. I'll go in, I'll do it. So he captures the city. So what happens? Caleb gave him his daughter Aksa for a wife. Now, this name Othniel will come up in a couple of weeks in Judges 3 verse 9. Look what it says concerning Othniel. I mean, why would you retell a story? He's introducing a person. When the sons of Israel cried to Yahweh, Yahweh raised up a deliverer for the sons of Israel, to deliver them. And who was that? He was a military man. He was a brave man. He was one that was laid down at his feet and offer, if you will lead men into battle and take this city, I'll give my daughter. Othniel is the brave Jew who came forward, and he's also the brave Jew who God is going to raise up first to deliver Israel from the oppressors. So Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, is the first judge in the book of Judges, and that's why his name is repeated or introduced here, so we know when we get to him what he had done. I want you to pay particular attention in these next couple of verses and see how women are treated at this time. I want to show you a society in decline. A society in decline. In the early days, I want you to see what God has recorded here, how women were treated. It says, Othniel wins the battle. Aksah, Caleb's daughter, is given to him in marriage. And now we see Aksah come to the forefront in the Bible. Look what it says. Then it came about, I'm in verse 14. Then it came about when she came to him, the daughter comes to the father, or the daughter comes to the wife, the husband, the new wife, that she persuaded him. Does the woman have influence in the house? Did the woman have a say in the house in Israel in the book of Judges when it started? Of all things that God could record in Scripture, He doesn't have to record everything, does He? He clearly doesn't. This is it. We got 7,000 years almost of human history, and He's condensed it down to this. It's not all in here. So when He records something, it's important to look at it and try to wonder, Lord, why did you choose this story? What are you trying to tell us? And He tells us a story about this woman in Israel. It came about when Othniel Aksah persuaded the husband to ask her father for a field. So he'd given land. She wants a field. Then she alighted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, so who's the conversation between? The father and the daughter. The father tells the husband, listen, I would really like some land. He's given you me as a wife. I should have come with dowry. I should have come with land. I would like to ask my father for land. And the husband apparently said, I agree. And so the daughter lights out to talk to her father. Look what it says. She said to Caleb, or Caleb said to her, what do you want? Does the father listen to the daughter? Does the father give the daughter the time of day, or does the father dismiss the woman as lesser? What's the answer to that? He listens to his daughter. She approaches and they have conversation. By the end of the book of Judges, women aren't treated as well. So the father says, like I would say, what can I do for you, sweetheart? That's exactly how I would answer my daughter if she came to ask me something. Name it and it's yours. So she said to him, give me a blessing. Since you've given me the land of the Negev, which is desert land, southern Israel, since you've given me the land of the Negev, give me also springs of water. Not only is she approaching her father demanding something, but she's an intelligent woman. Her intelligence is on display here. She understands what it takes to live. She understands what her needs are going to be going into the land to live in desert. We can make it work in the desert, but I'm going to need some water. That's what I need from you, Dad. I love this account. I love this. Give me some water. Give me some springs of water. And so what did Caleb do? He did it. The daughter comes to the father with demands, and what does the father say? It's all perfectly logical and within the bounds of reason, daughter. It shall be granted to you as you've asked. So Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. So here we see God has woven these few verses into the Bible for a reason. We see that a young woman, is demanding a blessing from an older man, and she gets it. Very interesting piece of Bible. She was given a desert land. As I said, the Negev was desert. She needed water. It was as simple as that. But as I said, we're going to see the demise of a society here. Soon we're going to get to other prominent women in the book of Judges. Can you name me one? She was a judge. Deborah was her name. We're going to see early in the book of Judges that there was a woman that God raised up to deliver Israel, and her name was Deborah. We're going to see as we go further into the book of Judges another woman by the name of Yael. Jael. Yael. And Yael is going to be a conquering heroine for Israel. A wonderfully strong, courageous woman. But by the end of the book of Judges, as society continues to move away from God, what we see is the deterioration of treatment of women in Israel. So by the end of the book of Judges, what we're going to have here, when at the beginning women are listened to, women are appreciated, women are seen as intelligent, by the end of the book of Judges, we'll get to Judges chapter 19, and we'll see a concubine, a female, who is with a Levite, a man from the tribe of Levi. We will see that concubine raped to death by Israel, by the sons of the tribe of Benjamin. They will rape this concubine until she's dead, and they will cause a civil war in Israel that almost completely wipes out a tribe of Israel, the tribe of Benjamin. See these things when we're going through this book. I'm telling you, Israel and the rabbis placed this book not in a history. The book of Judges is not a historical book. It's a book of spiritual lesson. It's a book of spiritual teaching for Israel. And I think the people that are reading this book, the Jews thousands of years ago who were reading this account of the Judges, could see, look what we used to be and look how far we've fallen. Look what happens to us when we worship Yahweh and call on His name, and He rises a judge and we live in peace with God. And look what happens when Israel walks away from God. Not only do you see the cycle of the Judges, but you see the deterioration of the size of the entire society. It just falls apart. And so what do we have in America? I mentioned a minute ago, in America, 2022, I see the book of Judges. We're in the cycle. Again, we're not Israel, but the cycle can be repeated, at least in essence. And so when we walk away from Yahweh and we have as a nation, what do you have in America? You have the deterioration of our society. This thing is falling apart. It's unraveling. What happened in 1963? Anybody know in the school system what happened in 1963? It was a bold move. It was a horrible day. They took the Bible out of the classroom. 1963. Now, if you know anything about the 1950s, pretty good years in America. Post-war, capitalism on the rise, prosperity in our nation, blessing from the Lord, having defeated Hitler for having stood up to a man that wanted to destroy the Jews. I'll bless them that bless you. And God blessed this nation handsomely in the 1950s. What happened to America? Same thing that happened to Israel. We grew fat. We forgot where our dependence was. We forgot where the blessing flowed from. And a short 15 years or so after the war and after all these blessings, we go into the courtroom and we kick God out of the schools. A society in decline. What happens after that in America? Teenage pregnancy. It didn't increase, it skyrocketed. Skyrocketed. What do we have just a few years after that? When teenage pregnancy, because you've taken God and the bounds of the Scripture out of the lives of children in schools, what do you have 10 years after that? Court case, Roe v. Wade. The deterioration of a society. I mean, you read these Old Testament things and you say, okay, yeah, the book of Judges, that's kind of neat. It's fun history, I get it. We can learn something about Israel. That's not why God wrote this book. This is a recording for all of human history. When you walk away from Yahweh, the one true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when you walk away from Him, you will fall and fall hard. And that's exactly where we're at. It's exactly what's happening here. We are kicking God out of every institution we can kick Him out of. And why did we kick God? What is Roe v. Wade in essence? What's the basis of Roe v. Wade, the court case that says a woman can abort her child when she's pregnant? What's the basis of it? What's the God that's being worshipped? Is the God who creates man and woman in His image and likeness, is that who's being created in or worshipped in Roe v. Wade? Or is it the God of expedience and the God of self-indulgence? So you say, but Rick, what false gods are we worshiping? This one. This one. Me. I want to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, with whomever I want to do it, and I refuse to face the consequences for my actions. And that's exactly what abortion is at the basis of it all. It's a worship of self-indulgence. It's a worship of self. It's a worship of expediency. And that's where America is. Fighting like crazy for things that should be obvious. Should be simple. You shouldn't have a person in America says, oh no, we think that abortion's a great thing. There should be no one in the world that says that's a good thing. We need to make a law that can happen millions of times a week. It's insanity. We're living in insanity. Listen, friends, the book of Judges, we're living in the book of Judges. We just need to understand it, that's all. We are there. Our society has deteriorated horribly. It doesn't mean that we aren't the remnant, the light, that the Christian church can't shed the light, share the light, the glow of the light of Jesus Christ. That's what we're called to do. But the nation around us is deteriorating. I'm just asking us to have the courage not to deteriorate with them. You see, you got this group, and we're bound together as Christians, almost in this herd. And from the outsides, you get these wolves and these ravenous animals coming and picking off the people on the outsides. They may be friends, they may be family, they may be mothers, they may be children, but we're watching Christianity. We're watching Christians getting picked off. And I don't want this church to be a part of anybody that's picked off. Firm in the faith. That's why we still open the Bible, and I don't come up here to tell you gooey stories that make your heart feel warm. The gooey story that makes your heart feel warm is God loves you, cares for you, and has called you as His child. But there's a great responsibility to that. We are to be bearing the light of Jesus Christ in this darkening world. Are we doing our part? Verse 16. Again, political information here. Remember, God is showing the landscape of Israel, the landscape of the land of Canaan, so that we can ask the question, why did Israel go into idolatry? What did God do that was so wrong? What did God do that was unworthy of worship that made Israel go into idolatry? The answer is nothing at all. But here we get a little more political information. This is an interesting verse too. The descendants of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up from the city of palms, that's Jericho, with the sons of Judah. Now that's interesting because the Kenites are Gentiles. Look what it says here. In the land of Canaan. Let's see what the land looks like. God has invited Gentiles into the land. Look what it says. These Gentiles, the Kenites, the descendants of Moses' father-in-law, they went up from Jericho with the sons of Judah to the wilderness of Judah, which is in the south of Arad, and they went and lived with the people. Isn't that an interesting statement? Look at this verse from years before, 80 years or so before. Moses says to his brother-in-law these words. In Numbers chapter 10, verse 29, Moses said to Hobab, the son of Ruel the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law. So who's Hobab? He's Moses' brother-in-law. And Moses tells his brother-in-law this: come with us. He's a Yahweh-fearing Gentile. He's a God-fearing Gentile. And a God-fearing Gentile was welcome in the land. Moses said to Hobab, Moses is the son of Ruel the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law. These are Moses' words to him, his offer. We're setting out to the place of which Yahweh said, I'll give it to you. We are on our way to the promised land. Come with us. Come with us and worship beside us. Remember when they left Egypt in the Exodus chapter 12, it talks about a mixed multitude that also went with them, the rabble, the Gentiles who worshiped Yahweh. When you look into this Old Testament, I don't want you to see it's all about Israel and nothing else. God made offers to the Gentiles. Come and worship alongside my people. He says several times in the book of Numbers in different places, if you want to celebrate the Passover with Israel, come. Be circumcised first. Become like the Jew. We're talking about Old Testament, not the book of Galatians in the church. Come and be circumcised like the Jew. And you Gentiles celebrate the Passover. Enjoy the worship of the one true God. It's not about Israel worshiping God. It's about Israel bringing the world into the worship of Yahweh by demonstrating how wonderful life could be in the land under the kingship of Yahweh. That's what this whole thing is about. But they didn't do it. So Moses has invited Gentiles, come with us and we will do you good. For Yahweh has promised good concerning Israel. So how did these Kenites get into the land? They went at Moses' request, his invitation. If you go back and read this story, the brother-in-law Hobab says, no, I won't go. I'm going to live in my land. I'm going to die in my land. And Moses insists. As if to say, listen, we need good, God-fearing Gentiles too. He insists that Hobab go with him, and so he does. And so here, the political landscape in verse 16 is they're in the land, and they have settled in the tribe with the tribe of Judah. I just love that little piece. Look what it says. Now we're going to see a switch. I got to speed up. The tribe of Simeon fights for their territory. Before it was Judah, and Simeon, his brother, went along with him, and now it changes to Simeon. Simeon is fighting for their territory. It says, now then Judah went with Simeon his brother, and they struck the Canaanites living in Ziphat, and they utterly destroyed it. Good or bad? That's exactly what God told them to do. Purify the land, kill everything that breathes. They utterly destroyed it, so the name of the city was called Hormah. Hormah is a Hebrew word that means destruction. They utterly destroyed it. It means to come under the ban. When God says, I have dedicated this city to the ban, I've dedicated it for destruction. I want all of it destroyed, and I want everything that breathes in it to be killed. That was the ban, or Hormah, the destruction. This is proper. What they did at this city is exactly what God wanted them to do. Keep reading. Verse 18. And Judah took Gaza. You've heard of Gaza, the Gaza Strip. I'll show it to you. It's right here on this map. That's the Gaza Strip right there where it says Philistines. I don't know if you can read it, but these are the cities, Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ashdod. That's where the Gaza Strip is today that you read about, that is controlled by Muslims. Judah took Gaza. Why did they take Gaza? Because they own the land. Because God gave Israel the land of Canaan. So who should be in Gaza today? Who owns the land? The tribe of Judah owns the land. God has given the tribe of Judah the land. So politics aside, Israel will always own the land. Judah took Gaza with its territory, and Ashkelon with its territory, and Ekron with its territory. Again, just laying out the political map. God's giving them success. Judah's obedient. In verse 19 it says, now the Lord was with Judah because they were utterly destroying things. And look what it says, the Lord Yahweh was with Judah and they took possession of the hill country. Fantastic. But look at the very next word. But. What happened? Did God stop? Was God able to take the hill country in the land of Gaza? Yes. What happened when they got to the valley? Who got fearful? Yahweh or Judah and Simeon? Look what it says. But they could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley because they had iron chariots. So let me ask you a question. Who got scared of the iron chariots? The men of the tribe of Judah or the creator of the universe? What's the answer? Judah. They had already followed the Lord into battle in Gaza and Ashkelon and Ekron where they had no iron chariots. But Israel sees the iron chariots. They get fearful. God doesn't wipe them out. God doesn't take the land for them because of Israel's disobedience. Look what it says in the book of Judges. What were they supposed to go in to do? Were Judah and Simeon guilty of something before the Lord, and that's why the land wasn't taken? That's why the valley wasn't destroyed and taken by Israel. Look what it says in the very next chapter. This is the angel of the Lord speaking. He says, and as for you, you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. Don't go in there and make deals with them. Don't compromise with them. Kill everything that breathes. I have decreed this. So God says, make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall tear down their altars. Everything that had to do with their false god worship, God wanted cleaned. But you have not obeyed me. It wasn't God's fault that the valley wasn't taken because of the iron chariots. God had no regard for iron chariots, just like He had no regard for the strongest army on the earth, the Egyptians, when He drowned every one of them in the sea. God's not afraid of those iron chariots. Of no concern to the Lord. What God's concerned about is the spiritual dependence of the tribes of Judah and Simeon on Him to lead them in battle. It was them that got scared. But you have not obeyed me. What is this you have done? Why have you turned to idolatry? Therefore, because who is it that went first? It was Israel that went first in disobeying God, and God responded to their disobedience. Because you have not obeyed me, therefore I also said, I will not drive them out before you. Whose fault was it according to the angel of the Lord? It was Israel's fault. Because they did not fully obey the Lord. They didn't trust Him. They didn't fear Him. They didn't stand behind Him and march into battle against those iron chariots. So God says, because of that, I'm not going to drive them out before you, but they, the Gentile idolaters, the pagans, will become as thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a snare to you. You want to worship their false gods? Do we have a God that says, I will not allow you to worship anything but me? Or do we have a God that says, I demand that you worship me, but I'll give you free will? Worship what you will. So God says here, that's what you want? You got it. Let's see how you like the afflictions that will come. And so He'll allow them to chase these false gods and go into Canaanite affliction until they've had enough, and Israel will call out on the name of the Lord, and He will send a judge. That's what we're talking about. We're just laying the foundation for exactly that. But what do we see at the beginning of this book? I mean, remember where we ended with Joshua, the great Joshua. You choose, Israel, choose this day whom you will worship. But as for me and my house, we will worship Yahweh. Wonderful, strong, courageous leader of Israel. A week of years go by. A tiny little bit of human history. the angel of the Lord comes down and says, you're not obeying me. Why have you slipped into idolatry? What is this you have done? God didn't do it. Israel did it. Verse 20 then is another summary. Let's keep going. Another summary statement. This has already happened. This then can also be translated and, which I think would be a much better translated. You see then, and you think it's chronological. It should be and. And they gave Hebron to Caleb. This happened years before, as Moses had promised. And he drove out from there the 3 sons of Anak. We saw those names a little while ago when it mentioned Othniel. He sent Othniel in to drive out those 3 men. Look at what it says in verse 21. But Caleb did his job. Othniel did his job. They drove out the people in Hebron. But the sons of Benjamin, in contrast to what Caleb had done, the sons of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem. What were they supposed to do? Drive out the Jebusites, kill everything that breathed. This is Jerusalem we're talking about now. This is God's city. The city on a hill. The mountain of God. But the sons of Benjamin, by no fault of Yahweh, by fault of their own, the sons of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites. What did God say? You have not obeyed me, so I will not drive them out before you. God is fully capable of doing what He planned to do. The sons of Benjamin were not. They were unfaithful in their job. They were unable to drive out the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem, so the Jebusites have lived with the sons of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. Now, let me ask you, let me paint the picture one more time. Remember what I said happens in Judges 19 with the Levite's concubine? What happens to her? They rape her until she's dead. What tribe did that? What tribe did that? Benjamin. What did Benjamin fail to do here? They failed to kick out the idolatrous, non-Yahweh fearing influence in the Jebusites. And what did it cost them? A life of idolatry. Why do you think God said, kill everything that breathes? Because they will be thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a snare to you. And in a few years, we see the sons of Benjamin so depraved that they would not only rape a woman, which is bad enough, but they would pass her around until they killed her. So you say, Rick, what's the big deal? Why did God write this in there? The sons of Benjamin didn't drive out the Jebusites. Big deal. They can coexist, right? Like the bumper sticker, God says, no, you can't coexist with them. The bad apple will ruin the bunch every time. And that's exactly what happened. Central Canaan, likewise the house of Joseph. We move up on the map, on the big map on the table with all the generals. The central Canaan, likewise the house of Joseph. Remember, Joseph had 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Joseph was given the double blessing. So we don't see on this map anything that says Joseph. Joseph was a son of Jacob, but we don't see his name on this map. He didn't get a single allotment of land. He got 2. And instead of naming them Joseph 1 and Joseph 2, the allotments went to his sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. That's why you see it written here, the house of Joseph, his 2 sons. And you can see right there, this yellow is Manasseh, Joseph's son, and Ephraim is Joseph's son. That's what we're talking about now. Again, just setting the framework and looking at what was happening in Israel and trying to figure out, why did Israel go away from this Yahweh? What did he do that was bad to them? Nothing. Likewise, the house of Joseph went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. So far, so good. The house of Joseph spied out Bethel. Now the name of the city was formerly Luz. And look what they did. The spies saw a man coming out of the city. What should they do to that man? What should they do to this Canaanite, pagan, idolatrous, non-Yahweh worshiping man who lives in the city of Bethel. What did God tell them to do to him? Kill him. But what do? The spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, "Please show us the entrance to the city, and we will treat you kindly." What do you call that? Compromise. Compromise. Yeah, I know Yahweh said to do this, but there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? It's compromise. And compromise equals failure. You can't compromise the truths of the Word. So he showed them the entrance to the city. They struck the city with the edge of the sword. That's good. But they let the man and all his family go free. That's bad. So you've got an idolater in the city of Bethel, which is interesting. I could talk about that city more. It becomes a very important city in Israel. You've got an idolater in Bethel and his family, and they would grow. Verse 26, we'll read about that one day. Bethel and what happens later. The man went into the land of the Hittites and built the city. Oh, so what's wrong? You leave one man and his family, big deal. What can he possibly do that would be bad enough to where they had to kill this one man and his family? The man went into the land of the Hittites and built a city and named it Luz, which is its name to this day. He built an entire city. An entire city built around idolatry and the worship of gods that don't exist. It all has fingers that are moving out into the land of Canaan. I think idolatry was probably worse after Israel got into the land than it was before. And I'll show you proof of that from the book of Kings one day, the statements that God makes about Israel being worse than those who came before her. Verse 27, I'll do this quickly. Manasseh did not take possession. Good or bad? God's fault or Manasseh's fault? Manasseh did not take possession of Beit Shan and its villages, Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages. So the Canaanites persisted in living in the land. Was that God's decision? Was that Yahweh's choice? Or was that the failure of Israel to do what He sent them in to do? All of those cities. Imagine the map with all the little pins on it. All the red dots for enemies of Yahweh. That's what we're talking about here. Forget enemies of Israel. They become chummy with Israel. They start to intermarry with Israel because Israel starts to love their gods and worship them. They're enemies of Yahweh is what they are. It came about, verse 28, when Israel became strong, that they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not drive them out completely like they should have. Ephraim. So Joseph's son Manasseh doesn't drive people out of his territory. So in this massive territory in central Israel, what do you have? You got Canaanites everywhere, idolaters. Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites who were living in Gezer, so the Canaanites live in Gezer among them. So who do we have so far? Judah, Simeon, Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh. All 5 of these tribes living in the promised land failed to do what Yahweh instructed them to do. They failed to cleanse their territories. 5. Keep going. We can add more to the list. Verse 30, Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kidron or the inhabitants of Nahalol, so the Canaanites lived among them and became subject to forced labor. Who cares what they're doing for a living? They're in the land worshiping their false gods still. Here we go. What was that? Zebulun, right here, purple. Canaanites, idolatry. Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Akko, or the inhabitants of Sidon, or Alab, or Akzib, or Helbah, or of Aphik, or of Rehob, so the Asherites lived among the Canaanites. Asherah, right here, Asher. Tyre and Sidon, all this coastal land, pagan idolaters everywhere. Look what it says in verse 33. Naphtali did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, etc. So they became forced labor, but they were still there. Naphtali. So now you got Asher, Naphtali, Zebulun, Manasseh, Ephraim, Judah, Simeon. It's the whole place. It's the whole country. It's the land of Canaan. They let idolatry live in the land of Canaan instead of stamping it out. Look what it says in verse 34. Then the Amorites forced the sons of Dan into the hill country, for the Amorites did not allow Dan to come down to the valley. Here's Dan right here. So the Amorites that lived in the land overpowered the tribe of Dan. They did not overpower the commander of the army of the Lord, Yahweh. They overpowered the disobedience of Dan. So Dan didn't take the land. So who lives in the land? Amorite, pagan, non-Yahweh worshiping, idol worshiping influences. That's who lives there. So the Amorites persisted in living in Mount Heres and all these cities, but when the power of the house of Joseph grew strong, they became forced labor. Again, it doesn't matter what they do for a living. It doesn't matter whether they're slaves or not, these Canaanites. The fact is they are allowed to continue worshiping their false pantheon of gods. And that destroys Israel. Verse 36, the border of the Amorites ran from the ascent of Akrabim from Selah and upward. So remember how many tribes came across the river? 9.5. The tribe of Gad, the tribe of Reuben, and the half of the tribe of Manasseh stayed outside of the land on the east side of the Jordan River. Here they are. 9.5 tribes would take their territory in the land of Canaan. How many have been listed so far that are allowing the idolatry to remain? God said, tear down their altars. It didn't happen. We've got Judah, Simeon, Benjamin, Ephraim, Manasseh. We've got Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali, and Dan. That only leaves one. You know who it is? These guys right here. You can't even read it because of my red line. That's brilliant. The tribe of Issachar. Now that doesn't mean that the tribe of Issachar were all God-fearing, Yahweh-worshiping people, but there is something interesting said about the sons of Issachar later in the Bible. In 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 32, when they were trying to decide who would be the king, Ishbosheth, a son of David, or David, the sons of Issachar went with David. And look what it says about them. Very interesting statement. Of the sons of Issachar, men who understood the times, with knowledge of what Israel should do. It's a very interesting statement about this particular tribe, the men of Issachar. They understood the times and they had knowledge of the right thing for Israel to do. Their chiefs were 200, all their kinsmen were at their command. They backed David as the king. They were right. So you go back to the book of Judges and you see all these tribes mentioned, but the tribe of Issachar, I don't know, just put that in your mind somewhere. They're not mentioned in this list of idolaters. Very interesting. It's not that they weren't. I could show you passages that showed they were, but it was interesting. So now we've looked at the political and the military background. We've looked at the map that God's laid out on the table for everybody to understand what's going on in Israel. And in chapter 2, we're going to see the spiritual background of Israel. I've shown you the geography, but now I want to show you their heart. I want to show you their heart and what they did. And the angel of the Lord shows up very quickly. And look what the angel of the Lord says. We'll talk about the angel of the Lord next week. In verse 1 it says, now the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim. And you say, the presence of eternal God on earth, this is going to be grand. And he said to them, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land which I had sworn to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. But as for you, so what does God say? I will be loyal eternally to my word. But as for you, You shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed me. What is this you have done? O Israel, who stones the prophets and kills those who were sent to you. How often I wanted to gather you like a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were unwilling. The angel of the Lord one day became Jesus the Christ, and those were his words to Israel. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who stones the prophets and kills those who were sent to her. The same angel of the Lord who just said what I read. How often I wanted to gather you like a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. Protect you, provide for you, defend you, but you were unwilling. Brutal, the book of Judges, brutal. Remember that verse I put up a couple of weeks ago, or that statement? The book of Judges is, I forget what it says, but it said something like it starts bad, continues on horrible, and ends horrendous, or something like that. It's the heart of man on display, but don't forget, the heart of Yahweh is on display too. I will never forget my covenant. I'll never back away from a promise I've made. Thank God for that. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly